Bam! MC is in the house. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chem, and welcome to the Warrior Stream, my weekly live stream, taking a topic deep dive and having a good time while doing it. Little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Good topic today, I think, but to sort of check those boxes first. If you are not getting my email, do me a favor, go to masterchimletter.com and sign up. It's free. I send it every morning. I tend to get a little bit more, I guess, aggressive, maybe forthcoming, maybe expressive on my emails than I tend to on these live shows. I'm not somebody that does well playing by the rules, so I usually find media that allow me to sort of be myself and it be acceptable by the rules expected. I hope that makes sense. It made sense in my head before I said it. But basically, if you're getting my email, I could say to you guys what I want, the way that I say it. Online, I tend to do the same thing, but I usually endure some sort of a consequence before it. Like a lot of people who talk about stuff that's half worth of shit, and I consider myself to be in that category, maybe a little arrogant on my part, but like those people, I have been demonetized, banned, allowed back on, remonetized. Basically, they let me know what they're doing with my alliance with them as we go, but I very rarely change what I'm doing as a result of it. So that being said, you never know when I'm going to disappear off of these platforms. And listen, I'll be honest, it might not be any of the platform owners doing. It might not be the elites, et cetera, throwing me off these platforms. One day I might just get to the point where I'm like, you know what? All right, I'm done. I'm done with this. And I can never foresee that happening, or I can't at this point foresee why that would ever happen with my emails. All right, so I've done a lot of productive work through connecting with people on my emails, and it's one of the things that I enjoy doing most. The other thing that I enjoy doing is sitting in front of a group discussing a topic that, that I'm interested in, and today is no different. But I got to be responsible. I've done hundreds of these things, and I still do it differently every single time. So I mentioned the email, right? There's links in the description for other relevant things that go on with me and my work, products, services, coaching, etc. Check those out on your own time. But let's get into who is here today. So if you are watching, say what's up. And we got my man, Jesse. What's going on, Jesse? Good to see you. Jack Gerber, I heard you stopped by the Academy this past week. Good to hear it. Glad you are still crushing it. Casetes, what's up, brother man? Talking about somebody who's supposed to stop by the Academy. I haven't heard that you stopped by lately, so fix that shit, right? And Johnny Groove, what's up, brother man? Good to see you. Today, when I wrote the email for today, it was one of these topics that I could have gone in a couple of different directions. Corey, what's going on, brother man? Good to see you. Could have gone in a couple of different directions. And I'm always trying to figure out, I guess one of the things that somebody who is putting videos out consistently, my email is a good example of this. It starts with the idea, meaning what am I trying to convey? At the end of this delivery of a message, what do I want to be the outcome? Do I want people to go somewhere and do something? Do I want them to have an understanding? Do I want them to participate in some way? Is this something that is more, sometimes I put things out to sort of publicly document them, like I was talking about this at this date. I remember years ago, somebody writing a book and including a lot of the topics that I was talking about at the time that he had never discussed prior to that. And it was, I felt a sort of way that I don't think was very productive, because it allowed me or put me in a position where I felt compelled to not appreciate somebody else being productive. And I don't like doing that. So sometimes I have an idea that I will put out in a way that just timestamps it in the eyes of the people that follow me, right? Admittedly, there's very few things that annoy me more than somebody coming up to me and go, "Hey, did you hear this?" And then they proceed to just recite a concept that I've been discussing for the better part of a decade. But that's on me, right? So all that being said, these are all the reasons why when I'm about to create any sort of content, I start with the end in mind, right? So that being said, right back to this morning, I'm creating the outline for today's talk, and it starts off, okay, I want to talk about a man and his word. And usually the topics that I pick are usually top of mind. I've either been dealing with them in my coaching situations, my real life situations and engagements. Sometimes it's something on the news or relevant and current events. But today, the topic of a man's word was a product of me having conversations in my coaching program these last couple of days on this very topic, and the relationship we should have with the investments we make and the outcomes that we tend to rely upon and expect even. So I had to figure out what I wanted you guys to walk away with. And my idea is I want you guys to be able to walk away with an accountability for what your word is. And within that accountability, a sort of set of parameters that I think are functional. Sometimes people are, what's up, Jamie? Just so you're there. Sometimes people are very much proponents or advocates for truth telling. You should tell the truth, the truth, the truth, the truth. And I would just as soon remind those people that every one of you lies, right? Including me. I lie. Everybody lies. And it's not as paradoxical as you think when you sort of add a little bit of context to it. I think the reason we lie, or when we lie, it's because we are not strong enough to tell the truth. And that's just a general universal observation. We lie because we're not strong enough to tell the truth. Because most of the time, the truth is the thing that brings us most closely to the outcomes we want. When we lie, we feel that direct linear sort of engagement is not going to produce that outcome. So we find a way to sort of influence it in a way to increase the probability of the outcome we want happening. So when we lie, it's because we're not strong enough to tell the truth. So that being said, if we're all fucking liars, right, because we're not strong enough to be completely truthful, how could we add at least some form of priority, to or maybe protocols to how we treat that dynamic in a way that allows us to be consistent, to sort of produce in both short and long-term goals the outcomes that we think are congruent with who we are, who we want to be. I remember having a conversation with a military guy, and this military guy made the statement, a man should tell his wife everything. And I was like, I don't agree with that. And I think the default reaction to my disagreement was, I'm a guy that likes keeping secrets and being sneaky and things like that. And listen, I have my secrets like anybody else does. But that wasn't really the point of contention with the statement that he had made. He was a military guy, and that was relevant because my follow-up to that was, can you think of some of the most heinous, just over the top, for lack of a better phrase, violence that you've been exposed to, that you may have even had a role in creating? Have you seen some things that the average person has not seen, that I would dare say the average person is not psychologically rigid enough, robust enough to be able to endure being exposed to? And he said, yeah, of course. This is one of the superheroes that I know, right? Like, this guy did some shit. That was his job. So I said, do you share these things with your wife? And, obviously what I was getting at wasn't some, I wasn't trying to catch him in some sort of, trap in this conversation. I was just literally, asking him to square these things away. And he said, well, no. I said, so you don't believe in telling your wife everything? And he said, well, I don't think she's built for that. I don't think that, she is, I don't think she wants to know that, and I don't think that she can handle it. And I said, okay, I completely understand that, and I'm not in disagreement with that assessment of your wife's ability to handle this. But I would ask then what if your wife wanted to know about it? Would you tell her, knowing that there might be a consequence that she might not even be aware of? His reaction was, well, I'd tell her the consequence, and I'd say, okay, so despite being exposed to the consequence, would you still tell her that? And at that point, he said, no, I wouldn't, because, she doesn't know what she's agreeing to. She doesn't, right. And where somebody goes one way or another on these, these little forks in the road in this conversation is beside the point. My thing is, we have to be very specific or at least very consistent when we use universal quantifiers like every and always, never, these concepts have implications that need to be considered when they're used. I don't want to lie. Saying I don't want to lie is the equivalent of saying I want to be stronger than every situation that would tempt me to lie, or that where a lie could be used effectively. That's just not the case. I remember a friend, right? A friend that I know, driving a vehicle in a state where the individual was not allowed to have a firearm, but this individual had a firearm in the trunk. In the state where the individual resides, it is legal, and he was irresponsible in not removing it from his vehicle while traveling through this one state that he was stopped by a highway patrol officer in. Highway patrol officer came, and the guy was speeding. A good friend of mine had shared with me the phrase years ago, when you're breaking big laws, don't break little laws, right? But this guy, this friend of mine, didn't know that he had forgotten his firearm in his trunk. Again, firearm legal in his state, traveling through a state where it's not legal. Guy pulls him over. When he gets pulled over, he has the epiphany. Holy shit, I left the firearm in the trunk. Police officer during the stop asked him, do you have any weapons in the car? He said no. As a matter of fact, as he told me the story, he said, in this state, we're lucky the government lets you guys have weapons. It's getting so bad for you guys out here. To which the guy chuckled, laughed, allowed him on his way with a warning, didn't even give him a ticket. If the guy was strong enough, he would tell the guy, yeah, I got a firearm in my trunk. What of it? But he wasn't. He didn't want to bear the consequence or the cost of truth in that particular instance, so he decided to opt for a lie. The idea that, we should always tell the truth falls under the same category that I described, earlier with my military friend when he said a man should be able to tell his wife, or a man should tell his wife everything. To which I just don't think it's very difficult to find a scenario where it would actually be inappropriate to be truthful in this particular instance. If you're a parent and one of your kids asks you about the bills, or, and I don't mean the Buffalo Bills, I mean the actual, like, keep the fucking rent paid and the lights on, etc. Parents don't want to talk about that stuff with their kids. They don't want their kids to worry about it, to concern themselves. So a parent will absolutely give some sort of response that just disincentivizes the conversation moving forward. And I think that is completely appropriate given their task. So I think starting off with truth and whether or not we should always be loyal to the truth, I think we should be loyal to the outcome that truth is supposed to provide. And sometimes truth might not be as linear and logical a tool as we think it is. So let's get into the parameters that I shared. Oh, this fucking fly. I've been trying to kill this fly for like an hour. That shit ain't working out. I ordered one of those little zappers that you hang out, has the blue light on it. It's coming Friday. I'm going to give this motherfucker the business. Anyway, I'm scared I'm going to like break my fucking camera and everything with this. I'm swinging it like a madman. Anyway, today's email. Today's email, I offered a couple of questions to initiate. John Wiley, what's up, brother man? Good to see you. To give a little bit of framework to this talk. And this is the email that I wrote this morning talking about today's talk. Throughout history, men have been able to connect through alliance in ways that have never required a contract. Why did that work when we could see so many places it did not? Why should you be a man of your word? Is there ever a time not to be? What happens to society when no man honors his word? So, if you guys have read Tribalnomics, link in the description, you know that honor is the currency of virtue within the parameters or the walls of a tribe. Honor is something that we could liken to a credit score amongst a tribal unit. When somebody acts honorably, he is demonstrating through his actions his willingness to be productive in line with the tribe's mission. If you're doing something that if everybody did, the group would benefit from, you are acting in accordance with mission. We could say that you are acting honorably. When you are somebody who demonstrates that type of behavior in a tribe, the tribe bestows upon you certain social benefits. And I think when we talk about, starting from the premise of, is a man supposed to follow his word? Like what's the utility of following, your word? We could start with social cohesion, right? So when a group of people are living together, are operating, functioning together, and each one has this sort of minimal level of consistency between what they say and what they do, what they obligate themselves to do and what they follow through on. There is a level of consistency that if everybody is allowed to or is capable of maintaining, the cohesion of the social unit tends to go a lot more smoothly. It's one of the biggest reasons why all of these multicultural, societies that are being built and incentivized are not as socially cohesive as more homogenous groups. It's because there's just a level of understanding and expectation that tends to align people's intents with people's expectations, such that everybody operates, sort of as a team. Teamwork makes the dream work. But if you have certain individuals who are following a paradigm of virtue and honor that is not compatible with people that they are living amongst, it is just inevitable and expected that there's going to be more conflict than if that group was homogenous. And I would say one of the reasons for that to articulate it is they are operating with different definitions of honor, different expectations of honor. I think when we look in more, and maybe this is it is a more Western concept, the idea of virtue, right? So if I say honor is the currency of virtue, virtue comes from the Latin virtus. So I actually think Latin it's virtus, which is really a word that describes a man, manliness, masculinity. So the idea of being virtuous, it is connected to this concept of masculine values. And I don't think, and I don't say that to sort of imply that a woman can't be virtuous, but I think in those societies that decided to use that term in that way, we're really describing the man who is functional amongst the tribe. You are a valuable man if you are acting in accordance with this way. So therefore, man almost like is a compliment to somebody, and we even use that, in some way, today where we could say this guy's a real man, this guy's a man, this guy's a man's man, or this guy, it really implies that he is who he is and the way he conducts himself is overlapped with some ideals that we think a man should have, right? Or at least aspire to represent. So we still use that in a way today. And I don't think it can be dismissed, the utility of being a functional member of society, having the label of what we now would call virtuous. So there is this sort of output, this end product to somebody to somebody's actions before we assign the label of virtue to them, right? So first and foremost, if we're talking about, social cohesion, it's very hard to look at how we're going to operate consistently on mission if everybody is moving in a different direction based on a different set of values, right? So a man honoring his word is one such way that you're able to maximize this offset. You're able to sort of streamline the conflict, the static, the inefficiencies. And why that is, or how that is when a man says he's going to do something and he does it, we could actually plan accordingly. All right. This guy may have different preferences. He may come from a different background, but you know what? What he says he's going to do is actually what he does. So we could allow him to be him, and we could adjust our alliances with him to accommodate his preferences, where they overlap with ours, where they offset with ours, right? I am not a Christian. I have Christian friends that for Christmas, they go to a church service. If they're Catholic, they go to mass, whatever. I don't do those things. It doesn't mean that the entirety or the function of our alliance is then incapable of being sustained because of this one instance of us having offset preferences. That being said, when somebody comes from an offset background, but they've proven themselves to do what they say what they do, and we can adjust our alliance accordingly, it winds up culminating in a more functional alliance. So again, what is this whole point that I'm making? When a man follows his word, it incentivizes and encourages and rewards, increases social cohesion, right? So another thing that we could talk about is, I would say, reputation and maybe your legacy, right? Which is the sort of generational reputation of your efforts. If I am somebody, to use the first example of social cohesion, following somebody or being incentivized when people are following their word, reputation starts to gift you with opportunities, maybe even status, without having to display this in the moment. You don't actually have to do something for somebody if you have a reputation, in that the reputation will precede you, right? We could look at reputation as a sort of a social credit score, right? They're actually codifying that in China now, and there's people that are incentivizing that here. But looking at it from an organic, perspective, in your group, if you're a guy that's known as a hothead, people will hear about you being a hothead, and if they meet you, they're going to expect you to act that way. So the reputation that you build by being a man of your word will afford you opportunities to alliances that may not be afforded to you without that reputation. So if you have proven yourself to be a man of your word, and that reputation touches other people, when you come into contact with those people, you are already benefiting from a credit that you did not have to establish specifically with them, but rather the reputation and that sort of credit score that you benefit from, and they could pay attention to, right? So I think reputation and legacy is a big part of it. Where legacy, to use that term legacy, it's really, well, what is the reputation generationally? If you are somebody who is known, I'll use the analogies or examples pop into my head. Game of Thrones. There was the Lannisters, right? A Lannister pays his debts. That was a reputation that was generational. It was something that even the younger generations of Lannisters looked to follow up on. It was part of who they were as a people, right? And so this is how that reputation could sort of transcend generations and start overlapping in the definition of legacy, right? So I've gone over that. What are the other things that I made? What happens is, all right. So if you're looking at what happens to a society when no man honors his word, if we talk about how do you make a deal with somebody where you don't know if he's a man of his word, or you're willing to make the deal despite him displaying that he's not a man of his word. This is usually where contracts come in. And contracts are basically codified promises of one's word, usually bearing an agreed upon consequence if it is not followed through on. The reason why contracts are valuable is because they usually recruit a third party to be the person enacting or affecting the consequence. If there's a government who is recognizing a notarized contract between two citizens, one person doesn't make good on the contract, the one who got beat can actually approach the government to basically back him up in his acquiring what was promised. Or if it's still not complied to, it is now the person who made bad on who broke the contract. He has to bear the brunt of the efforts of the individual he betrayed or didn't make good on, and that government entity. So it just makes a sort of 2 against 1 scenario that incentivizes compliance to these contracts. Prior to a vastly diverse society, or even at scale, prior to large civilizations, even if they were homogenous, the need for such a third party cohesion or enforcement was not really warranted, right? Because there was an immediate consequence to not making good on a promise to the people that you interacted with on a daily basis. There was a suffering. You would suffer a consequence right then and there if you were somebody who betrayed somebody in your tribe. I know plenty of examples of men that I knew who were friends with individuals who cut them off because that individual betrayed another friend of theirs. So this person did not act in a socially acceptable way based on the expectations of their social group, and they were ostracized as a result, right? And a lot of these things tend to be very organic from day to day. But there is a point where as groups scale past, here goes Dunbar's number again, you start getting past our mind's ability to maintain these social relationships. You want to basically, rely on a codified, consistent structure that'll absolve you or compensate for the limitations of being able to make good on these promises and the consequences that exist at a lower scale, right? 12 pack, what up? So the idea of having that third party, it's like, yeah, a man of his word doesn't need a third party. I'll be, honest. I've had some dealings with individuals that were complete, dishonorable men. They were what we would call a piece of shit, right? Low quality individuals. And you do business with them. And these individuals, one of admittedly, the deficiencies that I had to compensate for as a business person was realizing that, you can't, let me say this properly to not get myself in trouble. You can't put consequences on an individual within the parameters of business that you could at a much lower scale. Reason being, if you're ever going to operate at the scale where whatever arrangement you got upset over, if you're going to operate at a scale where there are multiple of those arrangements, you cannot expose yourself to the liability of bringing this to a personal level that many times. So what I had to learn with certain people, again, pieces of shit that I did business with, I benefited from them being pieces of shit at that scale, because it had me build the discipline to understand basically the agreements on paper really trumped any expectations of somebody being a man of integrity, a man of his word. So in other words, somebody who was outside of your tribe that you are contracting some agreement with, you would be doing yourself a disservice if you lead your expectations based on what you think a good person would do or not do. And I would argue and advocate for you from a priority sense, following the letter of the contract, right? So that's an example of a codified substitute for what operates at a much lower scale effectively in the form of somebody's word, right? Hope that makes sense. So another thing is, when somebody is virtuous, when a man, let's talk about like the arguments for keeping your word. It's the sort of practical aspect of keeping your word. I preface this whole talk by saying the only reason we ever lie is because we're not strong enough to tell the truth. Well, by that logic, somebody who's able to keep his word maintains the strength of his promises. He's not going to give an oath or a promise to do something that he cannot follow through on. So if somebody wants to be more valuable or even perceived to be more valuable amongst the people they deal with, it is in their best interest to become more powerful so they can make more and more powerful promises, right? I've said before that usually when somebody faces this crossroads of not being strong enough or not being good enough, they have a decision to make. And historically, in my experience, I've observed men to make one of two decisions in those types of situations. They either step up and become more powerful to be able to continue their growth as an individual, or, and I would say that this is probably the majority of society, when faced with that level of pressure, they actually reduce the size of their lives so that they no longer feel it. And they spend the rest of their lives trying to add maximum interest and engagement at a smaller life. Sometimes it's the guy who his whole life is sports. He's got a Yankees, he's got Yankees shirts on his wall. His kids are wearing Yankee shirts. He's got signed memorabilia. He's yelling and throwing stuff at the TV when the Yankees strike out or they lose. His life has no problems if one of his Yankee players hits a home run in a game, or like his whole sense of worth is connected to this game being played by disconnected people who have no idea who he is. That is a small life. Now, the person could enjoy himself. I would even argue that the person could lead a fulfilling life that way. It's just that the person is not going to live a valuable life that way, because value transcends your interpretation of its worth, if we're talking about how larger groups or your tribe is looking at it, right? So I think that somebody who follows his word sets a precedent for himself to constantly become more capable. So not only he could follow through on those promises that he made, but he can continue to make more powerful promises, understanding that that is a great corollary to him becoming more powerful himself. A more powerful man can make more powerful promises that he can follow through on, right? So getting back to the email. Is there ever a time not to be? All right. So this is another point that I can make, and I brought this up in the email. When is there a time not to be? So if I said, people lie when they're not strong enough to tell the truth, well, there are going to be times where I think we do need to realize that the truth will put you in a worse situation, or will put the people that rely on you in a worse situation. I'll give you an easy example. You're a man and you have 2 kids and a wife. A bunch of guys are breaking into your house and they're going to kill everybody. And they break in and your wife and your kids are hiding in a hiding place in your house. And they're asking you, is there anybody else in the house? Yeah, well, of course, I wouldn't tell them there's people there. Well, I agree. Of course you should, but just understand you're lying. What would be the scenario by which you would say, yeah, there's people in the house? It would be because you're either you got the drop on these dudes, you're a fucking Superman, and what they're doing can't stop you from doing what you want anyway. Like it's really a strength situation that changes. You are so much more powerful than them in those hypotheticals that you could say, yeah, there's people in the house. What? Like, who cares? Like, what are you going to do about it? But if we're not strong enough to do that, we're going to lie. We're going to lie strategically. We're going to try and sell it because of the consequence of not being able to generate the outcome we want, right? Knowing full well that we're not strong enough to just tell the truth, right? So there is a relative, component to this that a lot of guys, just maybe they're just too emotional to deal with. It's certainly a lot easier to say, just always tell the truth. The old mythology of George Washington with the apple tree. I cannot tell a lie. Like, that was all bullshit. But I understand the mythology, right? In TRIBALNOMICS, I talk about building a transcendent alliance as a sort of a point that can orient our morality that's just beyond our reach, so that we can move in the same direction without sabotaging our own goals. If you tell somebody, you should not lie, you're not lying to them by saying that. There's just a lot more to it to make good on that commitment than may be conveyed in you sharing that expectation. You should not lie. Just that doesn't mean that you should always tell the truth. It also means that, but it doesn't only mean that. It also means you should become strong enough to tell the truth, right? But sometimes it's easier to just share the sentiment as it is. If I look at, one of the big things that helped me make sense of so many, what I would say, hypocrisies growing up, how some people act, one way in one situation and completely different in another situation. And, I told you guys a story before of the one time I was jumped, in Edenwald Projects in the Bronx. And this is 1988, 87. And I was with a classmate, a guy who I considered to be my friend. We were walking through the projects. He lived in the projects. And we came upon this group of ruffians, this gang of ne'er-do-wells. I was in, I guess, 8th grade. So what am I, 12, 13? And these kids range in age from about my age to maybe 16, 17. There were definitely some older kids there. Maybe 8 to 10 kids total. They knew the guy that I was with. They knew my buddy. So I started fucking with him. They weren't ignoring me. Maybe they just hadn't gotten to me yet, but they were fucking with him first. And I opened my mouth and I was like, hey guys, we're just trying to, go over here. Like, we'll get out of your way. We don't want any problems. At which point they all then focused on me. And they were like, well, who the fuck are you? And it's like, oh shit. As they're, starting to surround me, I look and my buddy is halfway down the fucking block. And I'm just looking at the back of his fucking jacket as he's hightailing it away. So I'm like, holy shit. And I get hit. And I get, I'm down in like fucking turtle position and I'm getting kicked, punched. And at some point, they go to pick up a refrigerator that was outside, waiting to be thrown out, picked up by sanitation. And I was fortunate that they weren't strong enough to lift it up. They gave me enough of an opportunity to sort of jump and sprint through a seam in the group of them. And I wound up getting away. It was a baffling thing to me. And it was something that, I was raised, with two very strong aspects of my personality, as was my brother. We don't rat on our friends, and we don't bail on our friends. Those are like two things that my parents instilled in my brother and I from the time that we are young. You don't want to be the guy that tells on somebody else to benefit from it, and you don't want to leave your friend high and dry. And my life, I would say, is a testament to those two things. In this particular instance, though, it was one of the first times that I was dumbfounded by how could he do this? I don't understand. How could he do this? How could he bail on me? Like, well, what if they killed me? How could he not want to help me? I couldn't even understand it. And I'd have many such, interactions with people. And it wasn't until years later where I started realizing what would become the concept in TRIBALNOMICS of the wall, the tribal wall. It's like, oh, the rules are different outside the wall. And, my friend who bailed on me, He had a family. He would consider me to be his friend. So I realized it wasn't as easy as I thought it was. We were boys. Like, I'm the type of guy that if I'm going to meet a buddy for dinner and he's got a friend with him, and I'm going to meet Bob for dinner and Bob's got Harry with him. He's like, oh, this is my buddy Harry. Hey, what's up, Harry? How you doing? We're eating. And all of a sudden somebody comes to do some sort of violence against us. I'm not bailing on Bob, my friend, but I'm also not bailing on Harry because he's part of my crew in that particular instance. Those are the rules that I was raised by. But you have these instances where people are following different rules. So I had to sort of understand why they would act that way. And it was the tribal wall. Once I understood that idea, all of it made sense. So my individual friend, I was an ally to him, but I was an ally outside of his wall of tribe. This particular kid didn't have any siblings, was raised by a single mother. Who is his tribe in application? It's probably just him and his mom. I don't think he would have left his mother getting jumped by these kids. I think he would have stayed there and, gotten his ass kicked right alongside of his mother if that was the situation. But with me, it was different. Self-preservation kicked in, and he didn't worry about anything else. I had to make sense of it. And years later, instances and experience that I had like this did make sense. I remember one time in high school, this was in Bronx High School of Science, right? I went there for 2 years. And it was, it was a decent school. I just wasn't a decent student. And I was at a very, very emotional stage of my adolescence and not very productive. And I remember this girl in one of my classes. Right? I'm not going to say her name because there's actually people that know me and us, and like I don't want to stir up any fucking nonsense because it's not the point. But this girl told me that her boyfriend at the time, she was in my math class. Mrs. Klausner was the math teacher. I remember sitting in the class and she was telling me that her boyfriend, this other kid that was in the school, started slapping her around. And me, I've had a hero complex since I'm 5 years old, right? I want to be an agent of vengeance, right? Like since I'm young, like this is the fantasies that I tended to have. So at this point, it's like, oh yeah, this is a freebie. I could kick this guy's ass. And it was, I felt better about myself when I was able to beat people up. But I needed to beat people up that I wasn't guilty for beating up when I was done beating them up. So I had to find somebody that had some sort of excuse in my mind of deserving, an ass kicking. And I remember this girl told me all this, and I saw that kid maybe a couple days later. And I saw him at the Bedford Park Boulevard train station, the 4 train, which is a couple of blocks away from the school where most of the students went that were taking the train. And I happened to see him. And I went up to him and I asked him, I said, oh, so you think, it's okay to slap your girlfriend around? And he was oblivious to what I was even talking about. And I slapped him. Right? If you want to fight with somebody and you don't want to like sucker punch them or anything like that, there's 2 ways to start a fight. You could spit in their face or you could slap them. Sometimes you could talk about their mother. But a lot of guys, they could still deal with that. If somebody talked about my mother, it'd be like, all right, somebody spit in my face or slap me, man. It's like, I got a lot of mindset tricks, but it'd be hard not to put my hands on it, admittedly. But this was the formula I was running back then. So I slapped him. And he had to put his hand up because I humiliated him in front of a bunch of people. And we had a fight. And he didn't know how to fight. So I had to fight, with him. Right? I don't know if he had to fight with me. At the end of it, we were separated. And I give him credit. He was going for it. But at the end of it, and this was another one of life's lessons, the girlfriend from my math class was there, hysterically crying, cursing me out for beating up her boyfriend. And I just was like, I don't understand this. Like, what is the scenario? Again, it would not be until years later that I understood this concept of the wall. And how when you're inside the wall, you're treated differently than when you're outside the wall. And sometimes you think people are inside the wall, but you're not. But they're not, rather. And, I think it might have been this morning's email in the quote of the day. Yep. So today's quote of the day in today's email: for an alliance to be great, it must be pressure tested. If your alliance has not been pressure tested, then you are not being accurate when you are citing how strong that alliance is. What you could do is you could cite how strong that alliance has been tested to. But anything beyond that is a matter of faith. I've had plenty of friends, I'm sure you guys have too, friends that, oh, this guy will never let me down, this guy will never bail, this never, and then just enough pressure hits them and they're gone. It's like they become a different person. All of a sudden, you're on the outside of who they are and who they deal with. Just like when they were connected with you, you talked about people who were outside that alliance. A little bit of pressure, now you're on the outside. And it was a valuable lesson for me to learn. I started learning it early on. I still haven't perfected it. Right? I still got a couple of hangers on every now and again. But for me, if you don't understand that wall, you don't understand how those dynamics are going to play out. What I do know, though, is that the more valuable I become, the more capable I become, the more consistent I can be, and the stronger promises I can make. You know, I do like the fact that a lot of people that are connected to me, they call me when they're in trouble. I remember Tuhan Tom, he was at one of my PressureCon events, and he gave this talk to the guys that were great. That was great. And he talked about, what he values in himself as a man is that when people, his brothers, his allies, when they're in trouble, they call him. And, he's somebody that is known for basically martial arts and violence. And, he's an expert in many different ways to harm people. And he made a point to make this distinction. That is not the entirety of why he's called. He's called when it comes to, picking them up from their car breaking down, or helping them fix something in the house, or maybe they need to borrow some money, or, maybe they just need some advice on something. And he is allowed to make himself more valuable so he can make good on being there for his people at a more powerful level of scale. He is a more powerful ally. It's like you could have powerful allies in your tribe that you might not be as close to as other allies. But when you're in a situation that you need help, you don't call the person that you're closest to. You call the powerful ally that you know is capable of helping. And again, there's something to be said for a man who aspires to be that person in their tribe. And again, I would say it all starts with his ability to keep his word. Right? All right, guys, we're going to call it there. I think that is a complete thought. I think I closed the loop on what I wanted to say. Appreciate you guys hanging out. I see a bunch of you guys watching and lurking. I know you guys are taking time out of your day to spend it with me, and I do appreciate that. I will be here next week at the same time. If you guys are not getting my email, there's links in the description, or you can go to masterchimletter.com, and the opt-in form is there. I send an email every day, and it's free, and I hope to see you on it. But aside from that, again, I appreciate you. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.